Do you know the difference between an AGV and AMR? How do you successfully deploy these technologies into your operation? On this bonus episode, originally broadcast live on LinkedIn, I was joined by Vinay Balan, Product Safety Officer at Third Wave Automation, to discuss how to successfully deploy autonomous forklifts in your operation, and most importantly, how to do it safely. If you're thinking of implementing autonomous trucks in your operation, then this is definitely the episode you want to listen to.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Okay, we are live here today for this live edition of the New Warehouse Podcast, a continuation of conversation from 2 weeks ago. If you missed it, we'll catch you up a little bit, but we're going to dive further into the idea of safety around autonomous forklifts and trucks, and really safety in regards to the deployment of these trucks and what it means to, have a deployment, have a successful deployment, and then have a safe deployment, which is probably the most important part of that deployment. So I'm joined here by Vinay Balan, who is the Product Safety Officer at Third Wave Automation, which is doing autonomous reach trucks, if you're not familiar. So let's kick it off a little bit here, Vinay. Tell us just kind of like a little brief overview of Third Wave for people maybe that are not familiar and tuning in here.
Yeah, good afternoon, Kevin, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone that's listening. My name is Vinay Balan. I'm the Product Safety Officer here at Third Wave Automation. And what we do at Third Wave is we develop autonomous forklifts, the technology to make specifically reach trucks today autonomous, and we use the concept of shared autonomy. And that's where the forklift can operate autonomously. It can be operated by a remote operator if it asks for help. And then in the third instance, you can also just hop onto the truck and drive it like a manual truck. So that's what we do here at Third Wave. And I'm looking forward to the conversation this morning.
All right, great. And definitely thank you for that background there. And you are a safety expert, I will say. You demonstrated previously on the podcast, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. But we're going to talk a little bit about autonomous forklifts and trucks too. So I think we want to kick this off a little bit. You guys are dealing with these automated forklifts and fork trucks, which are a bit of a hybrid model, as you mentioned there. You can also remotely operate them or jump on and manually control them, which I think is very interesting and a unique approach to this. But, oftentimes I think there's some confusion, maybe you could say, right, Vinay, around AGV versus AMR or autonomous, and what is an AGV versus what is an AMR? So why don't you kind of give us some color there, I guess, on that, and, what the difference is and how to define those two different autonomous robots or vehicles?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yeah, this comes up often in conversation. And so I just thought I can help answer that in terms of, so an AGV is an automated guided vehicle, and this has been in operation for many, many, many years. But what's unique about the AGV is that it travels in a fixed path, right, from point A to point B. It cannot choose a new path. It just goes along a dedicated path. And AMR, so an autonomous mobile robot or, an autonomous forklift, is similar in the manner where it has a restricted region based on its mapped area, right? But what it can do is it plans the best path from point A to point B within this mapped region. And so that's the biggest distinction between these two types of technologies that have been deployed in warehouses. AGVs are fixed, AMRs can plan around, and that goes back to our conversation last time of one of the reasons because an AMR can plan the best path. So if it's traveling in a certain direction and the path is blocked, it can actually think and reroute or go around an obstacle. And that's where we talked last time about why, when developing autonomous robots, it's a journey, it's not necessarily a destination.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess you guys have, you have these automated reach trucks essentially, right? So would you consider Third Wave to have an AGV or an AMR?
I would say we are an AMR.
Okay.
However, folks that are listening, and if you're very familiar with the standards may not agree on the AMR piece, only because the R1508 excludes forklifts in their standard. And so we default back to the B56.5, which is the AGV standard in North America.
Got it. Okay. All right. Interesting there. And I think, it's still, as we talked about in our previous discussion, and if anybody in the audience missed the previous discussion, you can find it on the New Warehouse podcast feed as well from last week in there as a bonus episode. And additionally, I think that as we look at this technology and we bring it to, start to bring it to the forefront and people get more familiar with it, we see these questions like we just kind of answered there, AGV versus AMR, what does that mean? But one of the, we say, we were joking about this the other day, a little bit dirty word, right, in the operations world a little bit, is the word deployment itself, right? So talk to us a little bit about, if you look at an autonomous forklift or you're looking at some type of automated vehicle to bring into your operation, whatever the form factor may be, what does deployment kind of mean there? And what does that look like versus, just getting a regular manually operated forklift and bringing it into your operation?
I guess first and foremost, every deployment is going to be different. It's based on the technology and the customer. The thing that I have learned is that not all deployments are going to be successful, but you can definitely and certainly make them safe, right? So that's important to remember. What I've seen is, one of the things you want to do when you have your fleet ready and you're ready to put this technology into your warehouse is you want to understand the current manual workflow, right? What are you automating, right? What are the current interactions with a manual forklift or a human operator? Will there continue to be this interaction with the humans when you do deploy your automated systems, right? And then write out those interactions, understand them, know the capabilities of the automated solution, right? That's the next one. Understand the safety functions. What does it do? What can it not do? Does it have the right lighting? Does it have indicators? Does it stop when it sees something? Does it plan around? So understanding that solution again, and the other piece is, this is not just directed at safety people, right? So one of the things I always say is safety is everyone's responsibility, and with a successful deployment is like a shared responsibility between the OEM and the customer. So as the customer, you want to understand what the truck can do, right? And you should ask the right questions. Ask the OEM if you're not very familiar with the applicable standards that you have to comply with. OSHA does have a general duty clause that talks about employers providing a workplace that is free of recognized hazards that could cause severe harm. So even if you're not directly familiar with the robotic standards, OSHA does incorporate some of these standards by reference. And by that, it means OSHA is not going to write a new standard specific to robotics, but they expect, when they incorporate by reference, that the end user is familiar with these volunteer or published standards that are out there, and they expect that you would at least meet the minimum requirements. And so as a user, a lot of times people rely heavily on the OEM, and that's okay because they're providing the technology. But just remember, users also have requirements in these standards. And so there are sections specific to the users and integration, and what to do if you're deploying any automation, any technology in your warehouse.
So Vinay, I mean, it's very interesting because, obviously forklifts themselves, traditional manually operated forklifts, there's obviously safety precautions and safety guidelines and just safety rules that operations come up with themselves or are guided by, organizations like OSHA that you mentioned there, right? So as we look at, those typical kind of, I guess we'll call them maybe traditional, right, ways of looking at safety around powered industrial trucks, right, PITs, how different does your safety kind of guidelines, rules, training, and things of that nature within your operation need to be when you bring in these automated forklifts? I mean, is there much difference there? Is there similarities? Like, what do you need to prep for there?
Yeah, I think it again. I'm sorry to say this again, but yeah, it depends on the implementation. But as we were talking earlier, once you understand what the workflow is that is going to be automated, and you understand the manual interactions and the touches and the areas that this automated technology is going to operate, and you have a good understanding of what the safety capabilities are of the technology, like you mentioned, Kevin, there's a bad word in safety as well. It's called a risk assessment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the first thing you want to do once you understand the technology is to perform a risk assessment based on your warehouse operations, right? And so as part of that risk assessment, you're going to think about, what are the safety capabilities of this truck? Does it stop? What speed does it travel at, right? Does it go into areas that may have, high pedestrian traffic? And then you want to look at your safety program, like you mentioned, powered industrial truck program or the rules of the road, and try and understand what changes may be necessary. So I can give you some experiences where, although our truck can travel a lot faster, one of our customers had a speed limit that was a lot lower than our max speed. And so we had to adhere to that because there was a reason for their max speed at their warehouse. And so we had to reduce the speed of our trucks because we wanted to comply and ensure, a safe deployment. So things like that, right? You want to understand the interaction. You want to think about signage. Like, do you need any new signage to inform your workers that there's going to be an automated truck in your facility and this is where it's going to operate? The other piece is you want to look at the training strategy. A lot of times, what I've seen is robots may, in some cases, do things a bit differently than the manual operator, right? I'll give you an example. So in our truck, and I had this recent conversation with the customer, so it's fresh on my head, is a manual operator would normally pick a pallet, they would back out of the rack and then lower the forks and then start driving, right? Now a robot can do the same thing, but a robot, you want it to be efficient and you want it to not sit there for too long. So one of the things we have done is where, because we know the payload dimensions and the weight and everything's calculated to ensure like a stable truck, once we pick the pallet and we turn the truck, we start navigating at a very slow speed. Again, this is one of those restrictions for safety. But as we are traveling towards that next destination, we start lowering the forks because we have, our LiDAR systems can see what's around the truck. And so this is different. So the manual operator is forbidden to lower the forks when they're driving forward. So this is one example of something that could be unique about the technology you deploy. And this is the kind of conversation you want to have with the OEMs and confirm, make sure you're comfortable with that, but also make sure that your operators and your manual forklift drivers understand that a robot is, in many cases, very predictable, very repeatable. It's not going to suddenly accelerate like a manual operator may do at the end of the shift, which could result in, forklift tipping over or the payloads falling. So that's kind of how I'd go about that, Kevin.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. I guess the nuance there in a sense, right? You mentioned like about the forks and staying still as an operator to be lowering those forks down to like a drivable level, and then but on the robotic side, right? You mentioned there that it's doing that as it's moving in a sense, right? Because there's a little more control in place. So I guess that brings up a interesting question. I mean, would you say that the automated truck is potentially a safer operator than a human operator?
You're gonna get me in trouble, Kevin. But I think that's the intent, right? It has nothing. I mean, the human being is obviously the most intelligent, organism, creature in the world. But that's the intent with any autonomous technology or any automated technology, is where we want to be more consistent and predictable and repeatable, right? And that is something that is not easy to do as a human, right? We all have our emotions, we all have our moods. And so that's the intent. Yeah, that's the goal, where we want to be safer than the human operator. But that's a loaded term, because then people go into what does that mean? And I think we talked about it a little bit at the last event. in terms of how do you validate, the safety of your autonomous technology. So, but that's the goal. But as you think about that, I think, knowing what that robot can do, knowing that you have a risk assessment, now that you've updated your programs to reflect the changes that may be needed, the next piece is ensuring that your workforce is aware that this is a technology that is being introduced, right?
Mm.
And we talked briefly about it, but to ensure a successful deployment and to ensure a safe deployment, you want to focus on the why. You should let them know, why are you investing in this technology. Be transparent, right? Give them the benefits of how this helps them. Maybe it helps them to move on to other more complex tasks versus, driving around, at least specifically from a third wave perspective, driving around in a reach truck for 8 hours, right? Help them understand the safety benefits. There is no operator in the cab, so you've already eliminated any injury to an operator when you think about an autonomous reach truck such as ours, and there are other technologies as well. Talk about, maybe it reduces rack damage. You don't need to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fixing racks. Help them understand, that these robots are predictable. But the key point here is be transparent with your workforce and hear their concerns. Not everyone is used to seeing a robot driving around a warehouse.
Yeah.
They're always used to seeing a human in that cab, right? And one of the first things I experienced with a customer at Third Wave was this unique thing of where in their rules of the road, they had a requirement where as you're exiting an aisle, you make eye contact with the other manual driver.
Mm.
Now in our truck, there is no driver. So how do I make eye
True.
contact?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's things like that. Understand the concerns, work with the, OEM, and see what could be done differently. Now in our system, we have lighting that tells someone, that the truck's coming out of the aisle. It kind of indicates what the truck is going to do next. Is it in autonomous? Is it being remotely operated? So there's some training and education that comes with that, but I think that's the whole engagement you want to have as you're deploying these technologies. Hear your workers' concerns, help mitigate them, bring in your OEM as and when needed to help address. And in some cases, that may mean the OEM has to do something different, right? You have to build a new feature or you have to add something different. And it should be that ongoing engagement with the supplier.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's it's super interesting. Like, who do I make eye contact with now? I think that's a really interesting example there. It looks like we got Drew up here with the comment or thought. Drew, how you doing?
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Do you want more warehouse content delivered to your inbox? Sign up for our new email series called Warehouse Wisdom Wednesday to get an educational series of emails on warehouse basics delivered directly to you every Wednesday morning. Find the sign up link in the show notes.
Yeah, certainly, Vinay. I was just going to circle back on the risk assessment piece that you had mentioned. A lot of the change management is critical. What I've seen from deploying the mobile robots on the AMR, pick the shelf systems and sortation style of robots, is that there's certainly an initial lack of awareness that the workforce in the facility has about being around them, and that change management, that risk assessment, understanding what they feel is safe and portraying that back to the supplier is pretty important. We've had I won't go into any details on stories, but I have seen circumstances where folks weren't aware of what a robot was going to do, and because of it, they reacted in a way that on almost resulted in them getting injured by a different robot in the same area because they basically jumped in front of it because they thought they needed to jump out of the way of the other one. So my question from a third wave automation standpoint is, you were saying that eyes on the forklift driver that you're used to doing, is there a light or a scale or something like that that's displayed on the forklift that the operator can see that, oh, this thing sees me, right, as they're walking up to be in the vicinity of it? That was going to be my question.
I think what you just said earlier is so true, is the awareness piece. And thank you for sharing your experience. So when we started out with our first deployments, we didn't have anything like that. So this is a great example of where we said, wow, we need to make eye contact. How do we tell the operator we've seen them? So we do have lighting that's tied into our obstacle detection system. And so that will tell the operator that the forklift has seen them. I mean, in addition to that, the state lighting also lets the operator know that, what state are we in? Are we autonomous or remotely being operated? And then we have, which is very common in this industry, the proximity lighting that also helps manual operators know that a forklift is exiting around a blind corner. So they can actually take the right precautions to either slow down or wait for the robot to exit and then continue on their path.
Interesting. Yeah. And I was curious about that too. I mean, like if these humans, right, or if they're not used to being around robots yet, and maybe it's like their first deployment at their operation or something like that, how do they know, like, what the robot is thinking, I guess, in a sense, right? Like what's going to happen next? Because there's some differences there, certainly, right, where you have some automation or robotics solutions that are essentially a little like closed off to humans, right? But like for this example, like an autonomous truck, right, is not going to be in an area that has a cage around it or is barriered off or anything. It's going to be going right around those humans. So I'm curious, like in some of the deployments that you've done, I mean, how do you kind of prep like the humans in a sense to be around them, and how do you maybe address like them feeling more comfortable, I guess, around them as well, and give them make them a part of the workforce, I guess, make the robots a part of the workforce in a sense.
Yep. No, that's so important, and I think it goes back to being transparent. And the best way that I have seen that has worked is you do, if depending on the workflows that are being automated, maybe it's across the entire warehouse, maybe it's a very specific operation like Drew was mentioning with his technology. Bring in the folks that normally work there and demo the product, right? Show them what the system does, show them what it's capable of doing, right? Set them up for success in terms of knowing that they will be safe. And then there are going to be behaviors like, to Drew's example of how people may choose to react, but I get that comes back into the training, right? Of helping them understand here's how to respond to an autonomous forklift or another robot. One thing that I've seen that helps get people rallied up around introducing technology is they try and make them part of the workforce. So they kind of humanize them. So they give robots or AGVs names, right? I remember in the past we had deployed AGVs, and then I went back to that site to kind of check in to see how things were. And they had actually named the AGVs. They'd given them transformer names. There was Optimus Prime, there was Bumblebee, and it was amazing because now they refer to them as a teammate, right? And when you see that kind of interaction where they've accepted the robot or the technology as being part of their team, and they're calling it by names, for sure this is successful and it's going to be very safe because now they also care for that new teammate, right? And they're going to make sure they set that teammate up for success. Other ways are where if you can find a champion within that workflow, right? Maybe it's the operations manager or the lead that is responsible for that workflow, and give them ownership of the project or of that technology. Ensure they're successful, have them be the voice for the team in terms of concerns. Give them a good mechanism to reach out to you if you're the manager or the director or the VP. Give a way for them to reach out and say, hey, I found this or I saw this, what should we do? Or can you reach out to the OEM and ask them, and have that mechanism, a two-way mechanism in place, because once they are heard and once they see a response, they know that even all of us have their best interest at heart. And that's kind of how that's just two examples.
But yeah, I mean, I've seen that myself too, Vinay, like as I've been in different operations where you have people naming them. I saw one place recently, like they were named after Pokemon, actually,
Okay.
which is pretty cool because my son right now is into Pokemon. So So I knew what they were actually. Yeah. And, I think it's like such an important part to do that. I mean, I remember we did a demo, had an operation that I worked in with an AMR one time to do some cart and pallet movements. And like, we didn't even have like the demo unit in the facility. I mean, must have only been like an hour or so. Like we just started kind of playing around with it, and like right away, like, the employees were asking all kinds of questions because we hadn't had anything like in that facility before like that. And most of the employees there hadn't experienced that before. They've been with the company for a long time. And yeah, there was a ton of questions like immediately. And it was definitely a mistake, I think, on our part that we didn't, kind of cover that with them ahead of time and like discuss what we were maybe trying to do, even though we really didn't have any direction. We were just trying to figure couple things out, but still like having that communication and having them understand the why and, why are we exploring different things and, what would that mean for the future of what our workflows look like and stuff like that. I think is super important, like that change management aspect, right? So now, I guess from an OEM perspective, right, you're an OEM, right, third wave. So, how do you kind of help? I mean, do you have like a structured plan that goes into place when you're going to do these deployments to help these operations set up to be successful from just, obviously having a successful deployment, but also from like a safety aspect? I mean, do you have kind of like standard guidelines and stuff that you pass on to them and then maybe tweak a little bit, like you said earlier, for some customers? How does that kind of work or what should the expectation from an OEM be and kind of helping to guide you through this process?
Yeah, that's an important step in the whole deployment piece. And Drew, thank you for using the term change management, because that is critical when it comes to deploying these autonomous technologies in warehouses. At Third Wave, we follow a pretty structured deployment. Our deployments are pretty quick. Like within a week, we can land a truck and it starts running there. And so prior to that, because our deployment process is fast, we do a lot of the engagement before pre-deployment. So we have a team that goes out, looks at the site, understands the current rules of the road. I engage with their safety and operations team early on, help them understand the technology. I fly out as needed, do a safety demo with the truck. So helping the leadership understand the capabilities of the truck is very important, because at the end of the day, my approach has always been to have the customer train their workforce versus the OEM train the workforce, because the customer, whether it be the safety manager, director, or ops manager, that's the voice they listen to, and that's the voice they want to trust. And so my role in the whole deployment process at Third Wave is to build that relationship with the key leaders of our customers, help them understand the product, help them with recommendations on how they may want to change or edit their current programs. We provide them with training material, with videos, with documentation on the capabilities of the truck. And then we help them form this training strategy, right? So different customers have different ways that they train their workforce, especially if they're across multiple shifts. A lot of them do it at the morning stand-up, and they find that very effective with manual operators. A few weeks back, I was at a customer site, and they brought in all the ops managers and ops leads from all three shifts to meet with me sometime in the afternoon. And so I gave them a safety demo, answered all their questions, helped them understand the tech. And it was during that demo that the question came up about what I mentioned earlier, where we start moving slowly while we're lowering the forks. And so doing the demos, being there with them, I think helps get those questions out right at the beginning. Yeah. But it also helps them understand that, okay, this is something that is going to help me out at work. So yeah, I hope I answered the question, Kevin.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was curious about, how the support is there. Like, what should somebody expect from an OEM to have that kind of support? And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? To, have, because the managers or whoever's in charge of the safety programs and the trainers at the facility are probably going to know best how, their audience, their employees, right, essentially are receive training and go about training. And I think that's great that you're going and supporting them and being able to help them develop a program, but, not necessarily just saying like, oh, here's a here's a video, right? Sit down on your computer and watch a video, answer 5 questions on a quiz, right? And okay, you're good to go, right? It's good to like have that hands-on experience and be able to do that. So very interesting stuff with you here, Vinay. I think, Vinay, we're gonna do something later in the year together, right? Maybe potentially showing the forklift in operation from your site or something like that, so people can get a better idea of how it functions and see some of those safety features we've been talking about.
It'll be great. Yeah, the plan we had was to check in if it would be a good thing to do, and it looks like the audience has spoken. And yeah, it'd be great to have a session where we're all on video, but we also are live from our warehouse, and we can show you some of these safety features that we've talked about live on the truck.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
absolutely. Yeah, we can get Vinay on video and see if we can get the forklift to run him over, right?
that is the first
test.
That's the first test I actually demonstrate to most of my customers, because they say, hey, will the safety guy stand in front of the truck? And I said, absolutely yes. And once you do that, obviously we've developed the technology enough to where now it's even more comfortable to do that. But yeah, that's a great litmus test. Does the safety guy believe in his system?
There we go. If the safety guy believes, then it's got to be safe, right? So thank you very much, Vinay, for coming on again today and talking to us about some of these safety topics here and deployment and clearing up the air somewhat on the AGV versus AMR. We know the standards are a little tricky there, but really appreciate it. And for those tuning in, thank you for joining us as well. If you want to learn more about Third Wave, you can go to thirdwave.ai, and also stay tuned. We'll be sure to let you guys know, send you messages when we schedule that next event, which will be later this year, sometime in late November, maybe early December. And we'll get some stuff on video, especially looking forward to Vinay walking in front of that forklift, right? Anything you want to add here, Vinay?
No, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, listening. And Kevin, thank you for having me on the show again this week. I've been enjoying this. I hope all of you find it useful. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or comment with additional questions that come to mind after we are done here. I want to keep this conversation going, so it'd be great to stay connected.
All right, great. So thank you, Vinay, once again, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. Hope everybody has a good rest of the day. Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.